Hey, welcome back to the eDrum Workshop. I'm Luke, and today I want to dive into an element of kit customization on the Roland V71, V51 and V31 modules that's really powerful and convenient for the user. Pad exchange. This feature gives you the ability to swap any instrument from one pad to another, whether that's inside the same kit or from another kit, without overwriting or losing any settings. And it can come in really handy in these scenarios. You've dialed in an instrument that you really like, but now you want to move it to a different pad. You've loaded a custom kit that contains instruments that you like, but the pad setup doesn't match your own, or you've got the V51 or V31 module, and there are instruments on a kit that you want to use, but they're assigned to the virtual pad inputs, so you can't currently access them. This feature is particularly useful when using the custom kits available from my store over at theedrumworkshop.com. Every available input on those kits has an instrument assigned, totaling 14 instruments per kit. However, V51 and V31 users don't have 14 pad inputs, so these instruments go to virtual pad inputs instead. I'll quickly explain the options available to V51 and V31 module owners. If you're a V71 user, you can skip to the time on screen now using the chapter markers. V51 and V31 users are able to choose which instrument is triggered by one of the inputs on the back of the module. On the V51, this input is called AUX1/Tom4, and on the V31, it's AUX/Tom4. My kits typically have a symbol assigned to the AUX1 or AUX input, so you can quickly swap this input to match your pads in the trigger menus. On the V51, I'll open the trigger menu by pressing Setup, then using the arrow buttons or dial to highlight Trigger and press Enter. On the V31, I'll open the trigger menu by pressing Menu, then using the arrow buttons or dial to go to System, Trigger, and then press Enter. Then on both modules, from the trigger bank screen, I'll press F5 Advanced, followed by F3, which is AUX1/Tom4 or AUX/Tom4 depending on the module. And here I can use the dial to choose between the two different inputs. The input that you don't use isn't lost though, it just becomes a virtual pad input. The virtual pads can only be triggered alongside other pads by using incoming MIDI, and that's a topic for another time. But the more practical side of this for most users is that you can access these pads via the menus. This includes the copy menu and its exchange function, which will allow you to swap an instrument from a virtual pad to an input that has a pad plugged in. So to enable the virtual pads, on the V51 I'll press Setup, then use the arrow buttons or dial to highlight Option and press Enter. Then I'll press F6 UI Custom and use the dial to turn Show Virtual Pads on. On the V31 I'll press Menu, then use the arrow buttons or dial to highlight System Option, then press Enter. Then I'll press F4 UI Custom and use the dial to turn Show Virtual Pads on. Welcome back to the V71 users. Now, before I begin making any changes to the kit, I find that it's a good practice to create a backup of the module. This means if I make any mistakes that I can't easily undo, then I can reload the backup to revert the module to its current state. Now that we've got a failsafe in place, let's find the copy options. There are two ways to get to the settings that we need. The quickest way on all modules is from the kit screen. I'll press F5 Tools, and the second option across on the top row is Copy Pad Inst. I can use the arrow buttons or dial to highlight this and press Enter. Alternatively, I can access this from the full copy menu. On the V71, I'll find this by holding Shift and pressing Backup to open the copy menu. On the V51, I'll press Setup, then go across to Copy with the arrow buttons or dial and press Enter. On the V31, I'll press Menu, then use the arrow buttons or dial to go to Copy. The Pad Inst option can be found in each of these menus. Just as an aside, if I wanted to be really safe here, I could also create a copy of the kit to work on from the Copy Kit menu. This would give me another layer of failsafe. If I make any mistakes, then I've always got the original copy to go back to, or to copy a new version from again without needing to load the backup. From the CopyPad Inst menu, I get a few different options. Up at the top, there's the source selection. Using the arrow keys to navigate, on the left I can use the dial to pick the kit that I want to exchange the pad from. On the right, I can choose the instrument. I can either hit a pad to select the instrument, or use the dial to scroll between them. Of course, when exchanging from a virtual pad input on the 51 or 31, I would need to use the dial since there's no physical pad for that input. Pressing down brings me to a selection of checkboxes. These are different pad parameters that can be copied or exchanged. To exchange everything from the pad, checking all will check all of these boxes. Alternatively, I could copy or exchange only the instrument or V-edit settings, so that's everything under the instrument page, the transients, layer EQ, pad compression, and the other settings, or any combination of these. If you're unfamiliar with all of these options, I am going to try and cover them in a future video, but I'd say that for most people, most of the time, you'll probably just want to check all of the settings if it's a straight swap. That's what I'm going to do, so I'll check all. Navigating down to the bottom line, I can select the destination for the pad. If I just want to swap instruments around within a kit, then I'll leave this on the same kit as the source selection. If I want to swap the pad with one from another kit, I can use the dial to change the destination kit. There is something to keep in mind though when exchanging pads with other kits. I'll come back to that later on. Finally, I can either hit the pad that I want to exchange the sound to or use the dial to select it. Now this is the part where it is easy to slip up. To execute the exchange, hit F5 exchange. It sounds obvious, I know, but accidentally using copy would overwrite the destination instrument, so I definitely don't want to do that in this situation. Exchange will just swap the two instruments around, so the settings from the original pad are always maintained within the kit, which means I can always swap them back at any point if I want to. If we do accidentally copy it though, then that's what the backup was made for. It's also possible to use the F4 preview button here to test out what the kit will sound like once the pads have been exchanged. This is a great feature, especially if you don't know what's on the pad that you're trying to exchange from. For example, if you know that the kit file has instruments on all of the AUX inputs, but you're not sure which is which, then the preview feature lets you test without executing or coming back out of the menu. There are a couple of things to keep in mind with this preview menu though. First, there's no exchange option from the preview menu, only copy. So after testing the pads, I need to cancel back out of this menu, then use the exchange option. Then, since it's only set up for the copy function, it means that the source and destination sounds have to be in a particular order. With the exchange function, the source and destination could be in either order because it's a straight swap between the pads. But for the preview, let's say I'm exchanging a virtual pad with my floor tom, I have to have the virtual pad as the source in order to test the floor tom, otherwise the floor tom will remain the same sound during the preview. It's not a big deal, it's just something to remember going in. So this exchange feature is incredibly useful for customization, but there are a couple of caveats to keep in mind. First, this is a kit setting, not a global setting. So if you want to make large-scale adjustments across many kits, it can be time-consuming and you might want to weigh up other options. For example, pretty much every stock kit on the module has a splash symbol assigned to the AUX 1 input, or just the AUX input on the V31. So if you've plugged a cymbal pad into a different input and you want to use it as a splash, do you really want to go through every kit and exchange the splash, or do you just want to swap that pad into the other input? It's also important to note that when you move instruments from one kit to another using this function, they can still sometimes sound different between those kits. As we saw, you can bring over all of the instrument level settings, but there are other settings within a kit that can affect the sound of each instrument. For example, the ambience settings include overhead and room microphone modeling, along with reverb and kit resonance ambiances. Different ambience settings can lead to surprisingly different overall sounds for the kit, especially the overhead and room settings. There are also kit EQ and kit compression settings to take into account. So if these settings are very different between each kit, you might find that the foundation of the sound carries over, but some of the details might not sound exactly the same. So if you find that you run into this problem a lot, you might want to explore some other aspects of the copy menu. For example, did you know that you can copy the ambience settings from one kit to another? Fortunately, I've got you covered with a video guide to Roland's copy menu. The version online as I'm recording this was created with the previous generation of Roland modules, but fortunately the settings from the TD50X copy menu are present on the V71, V51 and V31 modules. So go watch it and I'll see you there. Cheers!